So when Ken asked me to do this, I agreed to do it on the condition I wouldn't have to sit in those goddamn director's chairs.
Uh-oh. Sorry about that. Oh.
I agreed to do it on the condition that I could shoot it for the film strip.
Oh, that's right. And there was
So
supposed
we
to
each
be
had these conditions. Mine was met. Yours was not.
Damn it. Oh, and there was supposed to be a table, wasn't there? I'm sorry, Paul. Start off on a note of disappointment.
This is better than the high director's chairs.
Yeah, I thought that was
the
really
high
bad.
ones you can't put your bottle of water down.
Yeah. Yeah. Marty really hates those too.
I did notice in the Q&As and Alice Tully in the last couple of days, the chairs seem to have gotten shorter from
Really?
the ones we
Is
had
that
last
true?
weekend.
Yeah.
They're no longer the high ones.
The chairs have gotten shorter. Okay. Well, that's because when there are more people on stage, there are only so many,
only so many big chairs.
so many high chairs. Yeah. I want to begin by talking about the common conception of screenwriting. It used to be when people talked about screenwriting generally, and I'm not talking about screenwriters, but people when they were describing it from the outside in, they were generally talking about it as a matter of dialogue. About it's and the model in a lot of people's heads was Preston Sturges. I don't think that that's true anymore. Does that seem right, Paul?
Well, I mean, I'd be interested to hear what Alex has to say because I have my own unique idea and approach to writing. But what you write is the fundamentals. You write theme, you write character, you write plot, and you write dialogue. All the rest of that is more or less the director's job. Now you can guide a director by the way you write, which if you say in the script, he picks at a hangnail. Well, that's kind of telling the director, you need a close-up here. So you can guide the director into certain visual things, but no director likes to be told by a screenplay how to shoot a scene. The secret of directing is that you reimagine what the writer has done, and you take something from the literary canon and transfer it to the visual canon, and that is a whole other process, a different half of the mind. So I don't have a lot of patience with writers who are trying to tell directors how to shoot a film.
That's a very profound answer. It's interesting. When I write a script that I am going to direct, it's written in a very specific way, and then conversations on set with actors, or in a meeting with an actor about a project, they'll often say, your scripts are not written like other scripts. And since I read very few of them, I say, how so? And I guess what I've come to learn is that I'll often put things in a script that are the opposite of a close-up shot on the table, but it's more like, the character pauses and thinks about this other time. And to me, that's very obvious because it's just giving the actor one piece of information, which is as far away as possible from telling a director, even if it's yourself, do this now. And
But now, do you put in camera instructions like a long dolly, a continuous shot? Never.
Never.
No.
I wouldn't know how. And even when I read scripts.
Well, obviously, with her smell, you're shooting very, very long takes. And I suspect while you were writing it, you knew that it was going to be long takes.
It's true. Of the 5 segments with the different styles, each segment just at the beginning said, Act 1, Steadicam. Act 2, dolly. Act 3, handheld. But beyond that, there's nothing. But that's for the reader. I feel like half of it is that when writing, you have to think, who is the reader? Because scripts are very seldom read in relation to a movie that's seen. So for me, it's the reader is the actors, and the reader is people I have to spend 2 years explaining the movie to. So you're writing for that, but then when you read, Hollywood scripts that are being made, a lot of times just writers put in things for the director, even though they've never directed, they won't be on set. And I don't understand that.
Well, and now filmmaking is being affected by television, right? Which is very much a writer's medium, writers/showrunners medium. No, I mean where the writers sometimes step in and
Yeah. Well, you see, like I read a script recently that, said jump cut shots of these.
Yeah.
And it's like that's not your job to determine like whether or not these are insert shots edited in that style. There's so many people.
Yeah, I had 3 writing offers. The first one I attempted, the next 2 I turned down, and they were from directors who didn't really like writers. And one was Nick Roque and Antonioni and Wong Kar-wai. And I worked with Nick Roque for quite a while, and finally I realized all Nick wanted was a kind of 50-page tone poem.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't really want highly structured drama.
Yeah. This is in the 70s, Paul?
Yeah.
Yep.
And then I had a meeting with Antonioni. I got the same buzz off of him. And then when Wong Kar-wai asked me to do it, I said, I've had this meeting before. I'm not the writer for you.
Yeah. But with Antonioni, was it a little bit more of a temptation? Because
No, because he wasn't that interested in plot.
Yeah.
And what I like to think I'm good at is a story which has pacing and which engages you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could never write something as good as Red Desert.
Mm-hmm. Coming at it from another angle is a recent experience of yours, Alex, is on Christopher Robin, a different kind of movie, and so wondering what that was like.
Right. So I wrote the Disney movie Christopher Robin that came out in August. I mean, for me, I wrote it like one of my scripts, full of things where the paragraph of direction explains what someone's thinking about. But then when I saw the production draft, obviously, which had passed through many other hands, it was written more like a normal script. Yeah. But it's just learning, and then even having someone involved with the movie say, "Oh, you have such a different writing style," and I feel like to me that's a term that is so reserved for novelists or pages that you read instead of like, well, it's just the dialogue is there because that's what you're shooting, and I knew I was not going to direct this movie, so I was never going to say a swooping shot comes in over the office and then it goes into the guy's desk. It would never occur to me to do that, but that is the way a lot of industry writers prefer, and that's the way industry producers are now used to reading things.
Yeah.
I mean, also, I've written in different styles. There's a normal kind of expositional style. I've also written certain scripts as chapters. Taxi Driver and First Reformed were both written as chapters without scene numbers. Just a heading: Travis gets a job, a scene, a couple scenes, and another heading. Travis buys a gun, another scene.
Late Sleeper was written that way, right?
Yeah.
Too, yeah.
And then I've also done some writing in the cartoon style, the cowabunga style, the exclamations and capitals, and what you're trying to then convey to the reader is don't take this too seriously, and you don't want to actually write on the page, don't take this too seriously, but you can do it through choice of words and choice of punctuation.
This is covered in the sequel to Transcendental Style, Cowabunga Style.
In film.
Yeah, it's coming next summer.
Yeah, coming next summer from University Press. Paul, let's go back to your first scripts and your experience with seeing your scripts directed by somebody else and transformed in the process. There was the Yakuza, which you wrote with your brother, Len, and then Taxi Drivers, 2 very different kinds of experiences. Oh, and Obsession at the same time, right?
Yeah. Bob Town came in and rewrote Yakuza. In fact, we were at office at Warner Brothers, and it was a 2-story bungalow. And I was on the top floor, and Bob was on the bottom floor, both writing the same script without each other's knowledge.
Yeah, an old Hollywood trick, right? And you had William Holden in mind for that role, no?
Yeah, well, I had a lot of things in mind.
Okay.
I was very young. But what happened was that it was really, initially written as an action movie, and Bob Aldrich was going to do it, and then Mitchum said, I hate Bob Aldrich, and so he went out, and Sidney Pollack came in, and Sidney tried to rewrite it as a meaningful relationship movie.
Right.
And as a result, it fell between two stools.
Yeah.
It's like, the big guy at the bar who sits down with one hand on one stool and the other hand on the other and falls to the floor. And so it wasn't quite an action movie. It wasn't quite a relationship movie. But I didn't feel I was being badly served.
Yeah.
I mean, because Yakuza was a serious movie, an obsession. But I didn't feel like I was a writer. I mean, a real writer writes something that people read.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I started thinking about directing, so that I could be, a writer-director.
Yeah. But with Taxi Driver.
I mean, I got lucky, very lucky with Taxi Driver. I mean, I'm very fortunate.
Pretty good director. Yeah.
It's very fortunate I didn't direct it, because I wouldn't have known how. Mm. And Marty was just both Marty and Bob were just at the right spot in their lives. Mm-hmm. And that's become, the film that won't die. But that was written as personal therapy. Yakuza was written as commerce. But Taxi Driver, which was written before, was written as a way to exercise some dark things that were going on. And, when I say to people, screenwriting has practical applications. It can help you in your life. It can help you deal with things you're dealing with. I often get this kind of glass-eyed response, because most young people think of screenwriting as a conduit to fame and success, and wealth and attention, rather than an introspection about how they can deal with their own personal problems. But that's the door I walked in, and that's the door I still walk through.
Do you think that those early experiences where you were seeing those scripts being made by other filmmakers sort of made you sensitive towards later experiences where you were directing your own scripts, directing scripts that other people had written, and then continuing to write for other filmmakers? Because you sort of, at the beginning, you had those experiences, which must have shaped the next 10 years.
Yeah, but I mean, there's nothing as humbling as realizing you're the person who fucked up your script. And that happens. And your hubris immediately collapses when you say, I wish I had a better director. I missed it. I missed it. It slipped through my fingers. And it happens to all of us.
You were just talking about one.
Yeah. And there's a certain amount of luck involved, and you can feel it on the set. Like the last film I did, everybody knew on the set that we were doing something good. You could just feel it. Other sets, nobody's quite sure.
This aspect of screenwriting as personal therapy, does that ring true for you, Alex?
Well, certainly, only because I don't have any other therapy.
Okay.
So, but also just because that is, for me, for at least the last 5 or 6 years, it's the thing that I do with all of my time.
Yeah.
So if it wasn't an outlet for whatever thoughts or feelings I'm processing during that year, then I don't know what else. I don't know how I could do it if it wasn't entirely a vessel.
So how much calculation? Do you write before you know the ending? Do you write before you know the title?
It depends. No to the title. We talked about this before. You said something once that was the perfect distillation of the exact process I have, which is how long did it take to write? I thought about it for 2 years and I wrote it in a couple of weeks. You said that, and that's exact. I mean, I've never done it in a couple of weeks, but for me, there is, at least in the last, several movies, a long sort of mulling for years. Titles there, characters, tone, setting, and then maybe a year, maybe 2, maybe 3 years later, I finally think I'm ready to try this.
Now, do you write just to write and then throw stuff out? Or what I do is I go through the oral tradition and through the outline process. So by the time I actually write page 1, I have a full outline, I have a title, I have told it orally, I know how long, I know all the oral beats, what happens here, here, here. And then I can feel I can write. But I've known other writers who figure out what they're writing while they're writing.
I'm much, much, much closer to the way you described yourself. The figuring out is in the 2 years of thinking, and also for me, and this is maybe just representative of making independent movies, it's 2 years of me starting to describe it to people. It's not telling the story, but it's laying the groundwork with crew, producers, investors, actors to say, so I'm writing this soon, and this is basically the movie. So I've walked through it a lot, but yeah, there's very little discovery on the day of the writing because I've tried to give it years of thinking, including, so Her Smell was the same. It was almost 2 years of saying, I know this character and I know the basic movie. And then once I finally had the movie, 6 months later, the script was completely finished. And I started it with a sense of basically everything that was going to be in it.
Is there a basic idea of kind of like almost committing it to memory, living with it to the point where it just becomes, you're not even thinking about it when you tell it beforehand?
I think so, yeah. And also because I try not to write any ideas down as they're forming.
Right.
Because I believe that if I don't remember them, they're probably not worth remembering. So if like during a movie that I'm watching, I think like, oh, that's a great idea for this thing I'm trying to form.
Mm-hmm.
I don't go off to the bathroom and enter it into my phone or write it down. I think if I can remember this by the time I get home, then I'll maybe write it down. Otherwise, I'll just try to keep it in mind and then tell it to 3 people and see, and then it'll kind of get retained that way.
Paul, don't you write out your structure like I remember you used to do it on index cards.
Never index cards. Index cards are too unwieldy.
Okay.
On legal pad.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that, and usually you have to get it all on one legal
on one
pad.
page, right? Yeah.
So you can look at it, see your entire movie, 2 columns. In an average film, maybe about 40, 50 things sort of happen. We're not talking about establishing shots. So you have them all listed with little descriptions of what they are, and you use a tiny little fine point pen, and so it's like Talmudic writing, and then you use your outline to make your oral presentation to a friend. Let me buy you a drink, let me get your coffee, and you tell them the story, and then based on that telling, you re-outline again. And if you get to the point where you can tell somebody a story for 45 minutes and retain their attention, and you can see it in their eyes, you got a movie. And if you start losing them, the exciting thing is just like stand-up. You start losing your listener, you start inventing stuff. And out of those inventions, Chandler, rather, once said, you get in trouble to have somebody walk in the room with a gun. The audience, the reader, will be so glad he's there, they won't ask where he came from. And the same thing is true when you're telling a story. I'm telling you a story, I can see I'm losing you. So, then a red convertible pulls up and these 2 huge black guys in purple suits get out. Wow, I got your back. Now what am I going to do with these 2 guys? I don't know yet. but at least I got your back. And so that's, for me, how the screenwriting process evolves. It's not really about writing, it's about telling.
There's a statement that, in his book on filmmaking, Alexander McKendrick said scripts aren't written, they're rewritten constantly. How does that statement feel to you guys?
Well, that was, for me, a big lesson that I learned working for Disney that I have now, starting with Her Smell, become very, very rigorously applying to my own writing. which was that I used to think writing was precious and that the script was sort of the end result.
Right.
And then doing a studio job for 3 years, you learn that oftentimes you sit down, take 20 pages, delete them, and have to start that entire sequence of the movie over,
Yep.
even though it has the same first beat and the same last beat. And learning that, I mean, even just this week, working on something, I was just deleting whole 5, 6, 7 page scenes just because I now feel like that is a very pleasant part of the process. Whereas I used to think that that was a waste of my time to have written it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
And now I really think like, and again, I learned on Disney, and I did this on Her Smell, like the final draft of the script is should be done about 10 days before the shoot.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great time to still be doing major revisions.
Mm-hmm.
And I did it on this movie, and I now feel like that's, there's no point in saying the script is finished ever, because
Yeah.
why bother?
Yeah, I have to admit, I totally disagree. Because, I can sort of see the whole thing, and I don't like to start writing until it feels right. And I was just recently writing a script, and I got up to about page 30, 35. I said, so there's something missing. And rather than continue, I put the script away. And you can just feel it if you feel it in your bones when you're going off the rails and you're just spinning your wheels and you're writing stuff that really, and at that point you just stop, and or you re-outline. But I couldn't bear to think of writing a 10-page scene that
you threw out.
throughout.
That you would
No,
later throw
well,
out.
It's very unpleasant.
Yeah.
But then it's fun to get to do it again. But also, what I was doing the other day was I have a script that just there was essentially a consensus that there was a whole subplot that the movie doesn't benefit from at all. And I was just essentially removing it, removing several supporting characters and just removing something so that the movie is much more about the main character, which is an obvious thing to say. And this note resonated well. I was given this note a year ago, and then I didn't really know what to make of it until very recently. And I don't like, I mean, it's not like I take no joy in it, but I take joy in knowing that it's going to be okay.
Yeah, well, I always start small. If a first draft is 60 pages, that's good. Or the first time you tell it is 70, half hour long, 20 minutes long. And then if it works at a half hour, it's going to work even better at an hour because you've got the bones and you just start fleshing it out. And so I know there are people who write long and then have to cut. I find that a very counterproductive process because you're thinking reductively of reducing it rather than expanding it. So I feel the same way about editing. At some point in the editing process, you say to the editor, let's do a cut where only the scenes that really work are in. And you look at it, and maybe it's, an hour and 10 minutes long. And then you say, okay, now what do we have to add? And your mind then is adding, not subtracting. And when you get in that mental mindset of subtracting, the script is 200 pages, I'm going to have to cut a lot of it out. I just find that not very creative.
Have you ever had like a 200-page script for?
Yeah, that would be hard to.
No.
Yeah.
I've had, when I first began to write, I was writing about 110, 115. Now I'm down to 90, 85 pages.
Yeah. But that's not really what you're talking about, Alex. You're talking about you creating the you're not talking about like writing, and then, oh my God, it's too long. I've got to take stuff out, if I understand you correctly.
No, yeah, it's not that. It's more just like I would rather, if I'm revising something, I would rather revise it from zero rather than just changing a line and thinking that I'm rewriting.
Yeah.
I would rather, print it out, delete everything, and then just be rewriting it from scratch rather than saying I wrote, from page 30 to page 90 is garbage. I don't know what this movie is. It's
Right.
more like if I'm going to rewrite, I want to do it from zero
Yeah.
rather than just saying I think I can rewrite within the framework. I want to knock down the house and build another one.
Yeah. And if you take something out, sometimes it opens up a space.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
but also again, it's just for me now that I've done this a fair amount. you just learn to kind of, it depends on what the project is.
Now, when these writing programs, word programs, are not terribly helpful because you have a tendency not to rewrite stuff you don't have to. Whereas in the past, you did a first draft, you passed it to people, you thought about it, and then you started a second draft, and you had to rewrite every single word, every establishing shot, every description of the car, and that was good. That was very invigorating. Now, writers will just cut and paste whole sections, and will lose the discipline of having to actually type it out over again.
Yeah, and my point is I would rather type it out over again. Every time I do, I think I don't need to write that sentence. That line of dialogue that's not worth retyping. That bit of description is way too long. I don't feel like typing 8 lines of it. I want to just make it, and that to me is a joy now. Whereas I used to think that was terrible. I used to just think I want to edit and copy and paste, but now I really would rather rewrite from a very basic level. But also, like it just depends on the material. Like Her Smell was written to not really be possible for that to happen.
Yeah.
Where just because each scene is 25 minutes long and each one was about 30 in the writing, you couldn't really do too much of that. And I wanted to write a movie where that wasn't an option, where you had to kind of commit. And I was up until the week before the shoot rewriting lines of dialogue and threading new little elements around based on the actors, but I wasn't changing anything because we'd already we had to just commit.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's not much improvisation in movies. That's a kind of myth. But what there is rehearsal. And most of what people think is improvisation, in fact, happens during rehearsal.
Yeah.
And so that in your rehearsal period, if you rehearse from 9 to 3, that means you then go home and rewrite, from 5 to 8, because every day of rehearsal has just lit you up in terms of what changes can be made. And I find a script gets rewritten in rehearsal, because when you actually see people trying to use the words, and you suddenly realize there are better words, or you realize that they have to keep trying over and over again till they get it.
Yeah, improvisation. I mean, everybody thinks John Cassavetes, or they used to think that John Cassavetes movies were completely improvised. Not really the case. Improvisation, if you really want to see it in action, watch The Wedding Party by Brian De Palma, if that's your idea of a good time. I wanted to just change the direction of the conversation a little bit and talk about, Paul, you mentioned Robert Towne before, a great writer, but someone who is known for the screenplay of Chinatown. So Chinatown is taught, in writing courses, and as a model screen.
Chinatown is his Citizen Kane, his curse. Once you write a perfect movie, what do you do next?
Yeah,
but
the ending of Chinatown is not. The movie Chinatown is not the ending of the script Chinatown, and that was, the ending of the movie was conceived by Roman Polanski. At the very last minute, and it's one of the obviously.
What was the original ending?
It was a shootout in an oil field, and the J.J. Gittes kills the bad guy, the John Huston character, and walks away, walks off into the sunset with. It really is not.
It was still called Chinatown.
Oh yeah.
Even though the last line indicates the title, so Polanski grabbed the title for the ending.
But Polanski also turned it into a tragedy,
Yeah.
It's I suppose that the two Jakes is probably closer to.
Like I just said, it is a curse when you write a film that is so totemic, because people think you can do it over and over again, and he can't. Who can?
Yeah. But you're also seeing as a writer to see his work altered like that. He would complain about it, but then of course that was the reason he was celebrated too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He.
You're saying the opposite of your statement with Taxi Driver. You said, I got lucky. He's not saying, I got lucky with that one.
Right.
It was in the hands of great people. He complains about it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not what I wrote, you know.
Strange opinion to have.
Well, I don't know.
Ask Stephen King. He'd been complaining about the Kubrick film his whole life.
You know, it's interesting. In his, he does this now. Of course, we know that. I just read his book, Dance Macabre, his book on horror, and he talks about the film and doesn't complain about it. And that book was written much closer to the release of the movie. I think he probably started complaining when he realized the movie was growing in reputation, because that book is, you know, from the 80s, and he just mentions it in passing as, you know, one of the many adaptations of his. He doesn't say anything critical, and he sort of says, you know, and it's very similar in some ways. And that's it. And I thought that's so weird. I wonder when he started saying that.
I think he's had a real, like Robert Town with Chinatown, he's had a real love-hate relationship with it as the years have gone by. He, you know, I remember a long time ago, he said he started to feel a little bit kindlier towards it, but still ambivalent because it wasn't what he wrote.
I feel like you've said comments to that effect about something like Obsession or some of your other writing
Well,
credits.
I mean, my problem with Obsession, other than the casting, was I had this idea, this remake of Vertigo, where you had a section in the past, a section in the present, and then a section in the future. And for budgetary reasons, they cut out the future section. And my conceit, the whole idea is, this is an obsessive love so strong that it transcends our time frame and it throws us into the future. And once Brian dropped that idea, my feeling for the experiment diminished, because that was probably my favorite thing about the experiment. It was set like 1960, 1972, and then the future was 1984.
No one seems to have been satisfied with the casting of the lead actor in that movie, but yeah, including De Palma. I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions. Yeah, sir.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to build upon the Roman Polanski question.
Yeah.
Was there ever a time where a director made a change to your script that at the time you were unhappy about, but later said, oh, the director was right, that change made the film better?
Well, I mean, I don't really think the writer should be on the set. Your job is over. And I remember on Taxi Driver, Bob called me up. I was then in Los Angeles, and he had some dialogue. And he said, do you think Travis would say this? And I said, Bob, I'm working on another film right now. You're in New York. You're driving the taxi. You got my boots and shirt. If you think he would say it, he would, you know? No, I wouldn't say that to every actor. But at a certain point, you have to hand that freedom over. And a certain amount of mystery. So, one thing that surprised me about Taxi Driver was Scorsese at that time was very much into needle drops. Mean Streets is all needle drops. So I thought, we'll get another needle drop show. And then he had the idea of approaching Bernard Herrmann, who had just done Obsession. And Bernard Herrmann was vehemently opposed to needle drops, although they ended up with one Jackson
Brown song.
Yeah. And so that surprised me when Marty first told me that he was going to go with Bernard Herrmann. And of course, it was a genius insight, because when Herrmann read the script, what he saw was a horror movie. And so he wrote a horror score. And unfortunately, he didn't live. He died the day after he finished the score.
But when Marty was designing the movie, the shots, I never knew this. He was actually listening to Astral Weeks by Van Morrison and TB sheets, and that was kind of like what he had in mind. But then he thought that's not going to work.
You guys were talking about scripts as like personal therapy. I was just wondering, do you think that there's a balance to strike between the script being for you and the script being for others, and an obligation to?
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat that.
She's a little soft voice.
Yeah, I'll repeat that question.
That's all right.
Were you done?
You can be soft voice.
Were you finished with your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is about Paul's remark about screenwriting as personal therapy and about striking a balance between the therapeutic aspect and then the, for lack of a better word, showmanship aspect. You know, how much it's for you, how much it's for.
Or more like, is your script serve as kind of, your audience or community or higher?
Does the script service the audience
Yeah.
or the community?
I mean, obviously, if you're writing an original piece of material, it all starts inside you. If you're adapting a book, now you've got a template of someone else's vision that you have to deal with. If you're doing a historical event, you have to deal with that. But you can find yourself in someone else's material. Like the Last Temptation of Christ, the Kazanzaki book. I felt there were probably 6 different screenplays inside that book. And I had to find the one that I could write best. And so even though it was Kazanzaki's, it was also me. And so you go through that. And if you are working in a genre, if you are working for established actress, you're doing something for Melissa McCarthy, you have to take that into account, and you have to take into account the projected audience. But you can still find a place for yourself. You do yourself a great disservice when you say, I'm not involved. I'm just a messenger.
Alex?
Yeah, I don't really know exactly how to answer that, but because, like on a very crass level, like any piece of writing for me, like I'm writing it either because I want to make it or because I'm being paid for it and I want someone else to be happy with their investment in paying me to write it. So it's not just like a diary and like a personal thing, because if I wanted to do that, I don't know why I would do it in the mode that is essentially my job. I would do that in some other form that's much more personal. So there is like a script only serves a purpose. It has to either be a sample of writing that you're using for some greater cause in your life, or the purpose is to become your film or to become your job. So then, like finding something in there that is personal, or like, no matter what the job is, or, taking ownership of it is sort of the way to look at it. Like if you're working with a novel, like Paul's saying, or characters that you didn't create, somehow you have to own them, and then chances are if you're writing it, you're only writing it because you have something personal to say about it. And if it's good, then it's exactly a personal statement, and also it's exactly what the people who are going to read it would have expected.
Become your job. That's kind of a quote from Taxi Driver, right? Yeah, right over there. Yeah.
I loved First Reformed, your recent film, and so this question relates to being a writer and a director, and it's for both of you. How do you, once you've spent like a year or 2 years writing a script, how do you sort of switch those hats and put on the director hat and like know what to let go of as a director and sort of separate yourself as a writer from separating?
This is a question about the distinction between the job of writing film and the job of directing, and at what point do you sort of let go of the writing part and let the directing part take over?
Yeah, you should write as if you want to sell this to someone else. You shouldn't write, although when I'm writing First Reformed and I'm writing the script and I realize I'm going to have to direct this, no one else would. But you try to make it accessible in that way, and just put this in your mind that a production executive will take home a dozen scripts over a weekend, and he or she will open them all, and they will finish 2 or 3. You got to make sure yours is one of the 2 or 3 they finish, and that means in the first 5 to 10 pages you have to nail them, because they're just looking for an excuse to set it aside. And so, yes, you do have to write it, not for yourself, but for a reader. But then, then you get the script finance. Now you're going to direct it, and what you have to, that's the moment where you change hats, and you say to yourself, how can I save this piece of crap? Look at this lifeless, inert script. What can I do? And that's your director's hat off. And now you're thinking visually. How can I visualize this in a way that brings it to life? And you have to act as if you didn't write it.
Yeah, and sort of, an inverse of that, because I've heard this phrase many times, is that when I made Her Smell, I went into it thinking and telling everyone, I've never been more proud of a thing I've written. So I'm not, I don't feel like I have to salvage this piece of crap writing. It was more like I need to service the fact that I feel this way, and I've been telling people I feel this way, so I really should deliver on that, or else I'm going to look like a fool for saying I think this is maybe my favorite script I've written, and then doing a terrible job executing it. Because then people would say, what did you like about it so much? It doesn't seem that...
No, you never tell someone else this piece of crap I've written, but you tell yourself.
I couldn't do that either.
You just do it to whack yourself over the head with a 2x4 to make yourself rethink everything.
What I was doing was I was saying it's not good enough yet. I was saying I'm very proud of it and I like it so much, but I'm still not finished yet. Hence saying I'm doing a draft the weekend before we started shooting. It's not that I wasn't saying it's a piece of crap. I was just saying it's still not quite good enough. So keep working on it. Take it home over the weekend. Come in with a couple little line suggestions.
No, but how much dialogue do you drop because you see the visual and you realize the dialogue is irrelevant?
It depends. On this movie, very little.
Now, in the case of Taxi Driver, the original script, there was much more talk about the loneliness of the cab. But once Marty saw the film, and he saw that big yellow monster moving through the night, all that dialogue about loneliness was redundant because you saw it visually. You saw the heart and soul of loneliness in this yellow coffin. And if you can get that across visually, it's so much better than getting it across verbally.
What about when an actor brings a life to what you're writing that just throws you? I mean, I think, Paul, your experience with Richard Pryor on Blue Collar was a little bit like that, and maybe with George C. Scott on Hardcore.
Well, the main one was with Nolte, because
on Affliction.
Yeah, I had a lot of camera moves in mind. I was in a kind of a Tarkovsky kind of phase, and I had all these camera moves. And we were planning them all out. Then we had first day rehearsals. And I saw Nick read the script. I called up the cinematographer that night and said, all those shots we were going to do? We're not going to do them. I just saw the most interesting thing about this movie, and it's Nick's face.
Alex, have you had an experience?
Not really. I've never worked with those. Those are all I think very bullish, massive performers. I've never really had that. Yeah. But also because I've never had really the resources or the means, so I'm always kind of explaining to people. If you don't have some sense on the size movies I've made of exactly what you're doing, then you're in huge, huge trouble.
Yeah.
If you're so I feel like I'm always kind of telling the performers, for example, in Her Smell, so this whole sequence is going to be done like this. Yeah. And if I change my mind, then we're all in a big amount of trouble because I've been telling that for a year.
We're all agreeing that we're making the same movie.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's never a lot of that. But again, that was the exercise of this movie and this script was me saying I just want it to be right. I just want to get it right as a script, and then I want to enter into this production with a very clear idea of what we're doing. Yeah. And I want to have written a script that essentially cannot be trimmed, truncated, or edited because of the style of the scenes and where each one just goes on for 25 minutes. If minute 11 to minute 17 suffers, it has to be in the movie. So it really shouldn't suffer. And that, may, hopefully you get as close as possible to.
But now in the case of Her Smell, where you've got, I assume you're doing dueling cameras. Two cameras at once, right?
Sometimes. A lot less than I think you would assume.
Well, when you're in that opening, that whole backstage stuff, that looks like dueling cameras to me.
There's there's just one part of the opening that is 2 cameras, and it's in the room where there's like 8 people towards the end of the sequence.
Because when you're doing freeform dueling camera stuff, people, do you let them go?
A little bit. Well, so all of that sequence at the beginning is Steadicam, so you can really only do so much. But the letting them go, that comes up in the rehearsal. We had a rehearsal day for each one of the sequences in the movie.
Yeah.
And in that time, it was, you show me what you want to do. And then when we were shooting it, we kind of knew what the actor had come up with, and it was alive and physical and exciting in a way that I couldn't demand of them.
One of the great innovations in directing was the movement in Denmark, or what was it called?
Dogma.
Dogma. And what was the dinner table movie?
The Celebration.
Celebration. In that case, that was probably 2 cameras, but the actors were not told what the shot would be. So that you would have a lead camera, and it would start to feel the scene. And then the backup camera would react and counter and go so it didn't get caught in the lead camera. And the actors didn't know when they would be on camera. They didn't know when they were off camera, when they were on camera. And that was an exciting innovation in how to make actors alive. And I was wondering whether you were doing
Yeah, we stuck to that a little bit. In my sort of appeal to performers about the movie, I did say, think of it like a piece of theater. If you're not the character giving the monologue, but you're on stage, you're still acting. The audience can choose to look at you even though they probably won't. And think of it that way, because the camera is likely to find you in any shot, in any take. But we'll have some idea of that, but it's going to change and it's going to be spontaneous. But a lot of that stuff was, pretty much as planned, minus the very, very little amount of 2 camera days that we had.
But you need to be working with a cameraman who's going to be so sensitive that they become almost like another actor. In this case,
Yeah.
Sean Price Williams.
Yeah, but also he wasn't operating the Steadicam.
Yeah.
So so when we were doing a second camera, it was
Right.
him.
A brilliant example of this is Detroit. She was doing dueling cameras all the time in that motel. And sometimes the main camera would just start becoming aggressive, and the other camera would have to walk off, because she had given the operator the freedom to go with the emotion of the scene. I don't think I could do that, but
Yeah, I know you've talked a lot about that sequence in the middle of that movie, which I love, and is the kind of thing I sort of was trying to hit on this movie. Just, an endless endurance sequence where the performances just, you don't know. It's just going to bend until suddenly the scene breaks in half.
Yeah.
That, to me, is a very exciting sequence in that film.
Hi, I liked hearing about your guys' different writing processes, and I'm wondering if you can talk about earlier in your careers the process of finding the process, how and when that happened, and how you might advise other young writers who are trying to find out what works for them.
The process of finding the process. That's an interesting one when you were, early in the careers.
I've figured out a way to write from the beginning, and I'm still writing the same way. Now, this is an approach which is based essentially on spec writing. If you're doing adaptations or jobs for hire, the approach really doesn't work. But if you can isolate a problem in your life, and then a metaphor for that problem, and then start writing a storyline through the metaphor, and see what happens to the problem as the storyline progresses. Metaphor, problem, loneliness, metaphor, taxi cab, story, kid, looking for connection in the city and blah, blah, blah. I still write that way. I wrote First Reform that way. Now, that's very unique. And it's something that I devised. I don't know if it works for other people. I've taught screenwriting a number of places, and this is the method I teach. But I realize that for most of the people, it doesn't really work that way. When I teach screenwriting, we don't start writing until maybe weeks into the course. The first 4 weeks are group therapy. And so that is a unique approach. And I began then as a night writer. And I read from 10 to 5 at night. And I had a friend who was a day writer who wrote, he got up at 6, smoked a joint, and wrote till noon. And I started at 10 and drank my way to 5. And, you know, we were both good writers, you know, so different horses for courses.
Yeah, and first of all, thank you for somehow situating me not at the beginning of my career, saying that when you were starting off, implying that that's years behind me. Thank you. It's not, but I appreciate the notion that it could be. It's just trial and error. Like we're saying, this idea that I have of that Paul shares of, I'm not going to start writing until I know where it's going. I only learned that by trying to write scripts that I didn't know where they were going and then not being able to finish them. So then I eventually said, I've done this 3 times now. I now have 40 pages of several different scripts, and I still, to this day, years later, don't know where those movies would go. So I probably shouldn't have started writing them. So it was just sort of trying that, not succeeding at it, and then once or twice saying I want to do it this way, and then not having time or not having whatever to write, and then a year later thinking, oh, I can just write this movie in 6 or 8 weeks. That must be something that works better. And, you know, it really is just like, but like you're saying, it doesn't work when you're doing this kind of as a job because you have to turn stuff into people sort of on a regular basis. So it depends just how much time you have. But like, I always tell people, like the best thing to do is just be free from any sense that there's like a thing you should be doing. Like I used to, like the way I write now is essentially like 10:30 in the morning. I like have a cup of tea and then just write until 6 p.m. and then I cook dinner, which is like having a job. And I wouldn't tell people this is how you have to work. Trust me, work like it's your desk job, because I used to not be that way. But you know, I wouldn't, if someone said I can only work at night, it would be, okay, great, that sounds fine. You have to be free
You have to
from
work.
you have to be free from the sense that there's like something you should be doing, that I can only work in public because I like the noise, or I can't work in my house, it's too quiet. Like just, you should be free from the idea that there's things that prevent you from being productive. Whatever they are, they're fine. Like, except that I can't work on planes or hotels, but, and I'll maintain that for the rest of my life. But other than that, I feel like, you know, you just don't tell yourself that there's things in the way of doing work.
I'm going to give you an offer to write a script on the condition that it can only be written while you're on a plane. And it's $100,000 for a first draft.
This is an offer right now? Oh boy.
I think you would figure out how to write that on a plane.
The question then is business class or coach, because
Yeah. Yeah.
and am I paying for all these plane tickets, because that's going to eat up the 100,000 very quickly.
And you're in the center seat, right? Yeah. Right there. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could elaborate more on how the script changes between when you sell it to the executive and then when you switch your gears to directing in regards to the metaphysical that you mentioned, Tarkovsky.
How does the script alter when you know, once it's, you know, in production and it's going, you know, how does, and you're referring to the example that Paul gave of Affliction.
Yeah, well, presumably, or hopefully it gets better. You know, so, depends what your circumstances are. There are situations where the script gets worse. I had that with Hardcore. You know, changes were being made by the executives, and I was, you know, bending to them, and I think the thing was worse. But so does it really ever change? You like metaphysically the core of it? If you sense that, it's probably too late. You know, I mean, I don't wish this on anybody, but it is very possible to be on a movie set and say, I'm making the wrong movie. And there's nothing you can do about it. But keep making it. And hope you're wrong. But you know, sometimes you know, changes aren't necessarily as damaging as you imagine. The original draft of Taxi Driver, Travis only killed black people because he was a racist. And when you're down on the totem pole, you're always looking for somebody lower than you to take it out on. And the executive of Columbia said, you know, if we shoot it this way, we're going to have violence in the theater. It's just too much. And so the character that Harvey Keitel played, who originally was black, was made into a white character. And Marty and I both agreed with we didn't like hearing it, but once we heard that, we realized that the executive was right, you know, that it would be irresponsible to do this. You could do it in a book, but to do it on a screen in a crowded auditorium, no. And you know, when we found a way to make it work, even though it wasn't as ideologically pure or racist pure as the original concept.
Yeah, there's time for a couple more. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about like the research that goes along with your work, and when you get like an idea, if it then like helps you that you really research it, just about the process?
Yeah, a question about research and how that works in relation to the process.
How much clubbing did you have to do?
Clubbing? Well, I grew up in the 90s listening to all this music and her smell, so I did my research then. But, you know, like, that's the thing. Like, so in the case...
Did you have a prototype artist?
Many.
I mean, is it someone you went and talked to?
No. I wouldn't have wanted to do that because then you're telling someone's story. But once the script was written, I did talk to a number of women in rock journalists, specifically female rock journalists, shared the script with them, showed it to women who tour in bands, and had conversations like that, which I found very enlightening. Some of them said, I can't believe that someone who's never been in this world has written this, and some of them said, there's something very fundamental that you're misunderstanding here, and that was fascinating. So I enjoyed it quite a bit on this film, studying, you know, women in rock music from the 90s to the present, which, you know, again, I lived through it, so a lot of this was my firsthand fandom of these bands, but then reading books, reading oral histories, really just like reading about music was something I'd never done. And I thought that was kind of interesting. If you're doing a film about a sort of specific culture, specifically a culture that is not necessarily best experienced as a book, reading book after book about music, I thought was an interesting way to think about music, not as a thing you hear, but think about music as a narrative. Think about bands as characters and people, and not think about music as just something you listen to, but think about it as something that creates drama among perfectly ordinary human beings. That was kind of my research on this movie, and it was very fun.
Yeah, well, I'm old enough to remember when you actually had to do research. If you're writing a movie set in New Orleans, you'd have to actually go to New Orleans. Now, you just go to Google and you type in New Orleans Diner 1975 images. Boom. And a whole bunch of images of it. New Orleans diners in 1975 come up. And then you pick the one you want to use and then type out the description in the script. You don't even have to go anywhere. You can do all your research in your chair. Because early on in my career, I wrote a script about Montreal, and I went to Montreal for 2 weeks, you know, and I wrote a script about Hank Williams and traveled through the South. I don't even know if you have to do all that stuff anymore.
Well, you do.
I think most people would just say, you don't, so we won't pay for you to do it.
Right. Yeah.
But there are a couple of things that I'm working on, that I would like to be working on, that I have a dream of that being part of the process, finally.
Yeah.
Just because it's you know, at the level that, you know, you're kind of starting at. It's not, I mean, did you embed yourself in a factory for Blue Collar?
No, but I did it in a rock band for Light of Day. I traveled around with Eva Dilkew and her band through the Akron, Cleveland, you know, that whole circuit. And and that's where the title of that script, the script was originally called Born in the USA, and then Bruce used that title. But Eva Dilke, which is Euclid Avenue spelled backwards, Eva Dilke just said to me one night, you know, in the middle of one of all these all-nighter things, and she said, well, I just can't help it. I was born in the USA. And boom. So, you know, sometimes research pays off.
Yeah, that sounds
For
like
Bruce.
sounds like a fun way to write that.
But
We
there
did-
there are movies that are made now that feel like they're Wikipedia movies, you know, historical movies. I don't want to name any. but,
Like
you
true
know.
story movies.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, certainly, and you know, like for writing Her Smell, like being fictional, you're free from that anyway.
Right.
Which is, you know, something, you know, you've certainly experienced. Like you want to tell a story, but not a specific story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but when you meet the real people, they always do something a little different than you think they're going to do. You know, it's a mannerism, a tick, a way of speaking, something. You know, that's where, you know, a good background in journalism really helps you as a screenwriter, because you have learned how to read people, and you know, so that if you're Gay Talese or Tom Wolfe, you know how to interview somebody and you know how to get what they have, and that's a very invaluable tool.
Does a good background in film criticism make you as a screenwriter?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, I think that you said at one point that you thought, you know, you want Dustin Hoffman for a part. Somebody reads one of your old reviews. It says, this is Dustin Hoffman's best role since so-and-so. And he said, oh, I guess he didn't like my other movies. Well, I'm not going to act for that guy. Right?
Yeah, no, I mean, you can't be a reviewer and a filmmaker at the same time. It's just too many fragile egos involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And yet, Kent,
yeah.
you have done this.
Yes, I've done it. Paul's done it. And, you know, I mean, Olivier Assayas has done it. Andre Tachinet. In France, it's a little...
Just be careful who you criticize in the next year or two when you get.
I
rid of
haven't
it.
written a word of criticism in a couple
Well,
of years.
I was just doing a talk with Spike at the DGA, and I was ragging on Denzel Washington for this Transporter movie or whatever it was called. And I said, you know, he's such a great star. Only he could have made that interesting. And Spike said to me, don't rag on the D. I need to work with him.
Do one more. Yeah. Yes.
How do you find developing a character that you have nothing in common with and no personal experience to link and relate?
Yeah, developing a character that you have absolutely nothing in common with.
I don't think there is such a thing. You know, we're all human. And I may think I have nothing in common with you. But I sit, talk to you. We go to a museum, we have dinner. I'll find common ground. You may not even know what it is. You may not even recognize it. I may have reached into me and transplanted it into you, and then said it was yours. But I'll find it. There is no such thing as somebody you have nothing in common with.
I probably can't answer that any better than that.
Yeah, agreed. You guys, we have to wrap up, but thank you. This was great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.